Hi everybody. So, welcome back on my YouTube channel and welcome back with our musings about Bach's Art of Fugue. Last episode we ended up with a result, a suggestion for a last finishing fugue based on 4 themes Bach had left us. This video has been intended as a kind of appendix. I wanted to share some of the trivia of decisions or some peanuts of decisions. Yeah, the score is full of them. But while writing the script here, I changed dozens of tiny things in my notes. So my first conception for this video floated down the river. The new conception for today, first a look outside the box, reviewing details from foreign solutions, namely written by Moroney, Thomas Daniel and Göncz. These are the 3 scores I know, with different consequences as rooted in our different approaches compared to my fugue. And very first I lose some few words about Hans-Eberhard Dentler's book about Bach's Art of Fugue. We mentioned this earlier without any appreciation of this so far. And in the second part, I'll share some further weaknesses I found in my own score while writing the first and now discarded script for this video. So, again, have a coffee and we start. First part, well, let's start with cellist Hans-Eberhard Dentler's Pythagorean approach to Bach's late works. And to begin with a confession, this note must be unfair because of a lack of time. Dentler's book is rich enough to give him a long, detailed video, or perhaps 2 of them. I can't do this without ending up in a 90-minute cinema movie length. In core, Dentler sees the art of fugue as a transfer from Pythagorean philosophy into a musical score. Dentler has found dozens of hints for this, starting from Bach's connection to Lorenz Mitzler as well as to the temporary head of Thomas School, Johann Matthias Gesner, and ending on details like the used font of the first edition digits or numbers. The lecture of Dentler's book will leave you back enriched, and the erudition of the in 1947 born author is awesome. At the same time, just this erudition is my first question mark. Probably Dentler has needed decades for getting his results, which often are based on old Greek sources. Bach needed decades for creating his immense life work between probably hundreds of students through the times and choir lessons and orchestral rehearsals and copying voice sets from cantatas and concerts and delegating copy tasks and having trouble with Leipziger authorities. In 18th century, more religious festivals were celebrated and all longer than today. Even, did you know that Bach had to submit his libretti to a censorship board in Leipzig? And remember the Collegium Musicum, founded by Telemann in Leipzig, where Bach had the responsibility for probably 1 decade or so, or more? Not to mention the large family with all the tragedies there and the problems. You will get my consideration. if I assure you that Dentler's book is deeply rooted in old Greek sources. How should Bach have taken the time for diving so deeply into language and philosophy between everything else? And in 18th century, every single information was available only via library or letter or discussion with other peoples. Information has been rare and were reachable with effort and time only. No Bill Gates with information at your fingertips. Dentler points here to Bach's friendship with Johann Matthias Gesner and Lorenz Mitzler. From both, Bach should have learned the thoughts of Pythagoras. And beyond this, a text like Scipio's Dream by Cicero could Bach have known since his own school time around 1700. This may be possible, of course, but where is the bridge from old Roman or old Greek philosophy to Bach's verses or Bach's scores? We talked about that from other sides, and here again, let's assume between hundreds of cantata scores, oratorios, concerts, concertos, and the late organ works, the B minor mass between Goldberg, between Job, family, and. Yes, Bach had managed the miracle of getting deeper knowledge in Greek philological sources. Then I run into my old problem. Dentler can only conclude from Mitzler's and Gesner's testified classical philological knowledge that Bach could have acquired deeper Old Greek knowledge from conversations with both of them. Well, I won't exclude this, but we have no valid handwritten sources from Bach's hand testifying that Bach had used any familiarity with those old Greek sources inside his music. And more, we do not need them for explaining Bach's scores. Do you remember our dear William from Ockham from first episodes? The digit 1 in Dentler's book called Monade. The digit 4 for Dentit, rooted in Pythagorean tetractys. The mirror principle, the dualism, all those things may be explained with inner musical conceptions only. And I did so in earlier videos. Even the font of the digit 1 editor Schübler used is for Dentler a hidden hint to the medallion of Mitzler's musical society, on which the digit 1 is engraved in the same font shape. And from here Dentler concludes to Pythagoras, as Mitzler founded his society on Pythagorean philosophy. However, without sources, I may also assume Bach uses this font shape as an external symbol because he had written the Art of Fugue as an erudite work for exact this society, Mitzler society. This would be an explanation without any use of hidden Pythagorean secrets, and with best wishes from dear brother William. For the bridge which connects Bach with Pythagoras, Dentler has only circumstantial evidences. Nevertheless, a recommendation from here: if you are interested in such things, read Dentler's publication. Probably you learn so much here. Most of it can rarely found anywhere else. And as I told, Dentler's rich book is definitely worthy of having a much more in-depth review. But this would blast off this video, and I really want to conclude this series with this episode. Okay, Dentler as well as Rechtsteiner, we earlier talked about, and both belong to the more theoretical authors. I know 3 other ones who suggested a concrete score. In opposite to my own approach, all of them completed Bach's fragment as quadruple fugue. Let's have a last look on the consequences of our different approaches. The first, Davitt Moroney. He is cembalist and editor from Art of Fugue's Händler edition. Händler publisher in Munich offers, in my view of things, some of the worldwide finest edition of musical scores ever. Same here for Bachs Art of Fugue. As an editor, Moroney's work is wonderful. In his fragment's completion, Moroney follows Greg Butler's suggestion, as I do as well. If you do not know Butler, please go to earlier videos of this series. Moroney's completion has nothing to do with Bach's design of the fragment. Putting some glue at the end of Bach's fragment and sticking the main theme without any preparation at its end destroys the balance of the entire fugue, and that's what Moroney did. No exposition, nothing, but a quick addition of the main theme and a stretto of all 4 themes until Butler's suggested amount of bars is consumed. Why should Bach take the effort of introducing all themes with single expositions and throwing at the end all concepts apart? No. Bach handles his themes careful, and if you stick on Bach's fragment layout, you should give the main theme indeed its own exposition. Thomas Daniel is right here, as I think. But the design underlying group 3 triple fugues is powerful, as you get rid of all problems which comes apart introducing the main theme in its own exposition. In this late state of Art of Fugue, of course. Thomas Daniel, the second author with a suggestion of a concrete score, ran into these problems with all the difficulties we've spoken about in last videos. And obviously, Daniel did not find a solution with his standard toolbox. So, see here, he relinquished the common answer in the fifth. All themes are introduced from the bass tone D. And Daniel changes the metrics. Bach's regularity in introducing the voices is gone in Daniel's attempt. The main theme follows after 3 or 1.5 bars. So in soprano, the emphasis of the theme is shifted from the first to the second note. The reason for this irregularity in metrics is probably that Daniel tries to get distance from Bach's overmighty examples of the first 7 contrapunti. Bach has simply nothing left for Daniel to build an exposition with something new in conventional sense. Zoltan Göncz, our third author, bypasses this problem with ease. Göncz doesn't even make any attempt of writing a 4th exposition. Instead, Göncz increases the 4 voices to the amount of 5 before he then introduces the main theme. And a 5th voice, which appears in mid of a fugue and disappears then again, has no parallel to Bach's fugues at all. And nevertheless, the main theme appears as fallen from heaven in Göncz's attempt, in my view. Of course, I accept a multiplying of voices, as I told in last video. But not ad libitum in mid of the fugue. In group 2, Bach increases the voices in the last finishing bars. He never does so in earlier parts of any of his fugues. And a last annotation, Göncz underlies a permutational model in his completion. From view on the liberty you need while writing a quadruple fugue, as from view on Bach's biography as well, Göncz is wrong in my eyes. A permutation fugue is a closer relative to the canon. In such a fugue, the themes, their companions, are the contrapuntal motifs rotate between the voices. Rudolf Lutz explains it in detail in a seminary, which is here on YouTube. I'll give you the link down in the box. It's a German language, but with drawings and probably understandable. However, a fugue which develops 4 themes has simply no time and no room for just rotating around the thematical material. Or to put it another way, if you do so, you will never expand the contrapuntal possibilities hidden inside those themes. In Bach's entire life, I do not know even one single permutation fugue based on 2 or more themes. And more, the latest permutation fugue from Bach is, as far as I know, inside the introduction chorus from Cantata 105, Herr, gehe nicht ins Gericht. Bach wrote this cantata in 1723, that's in his very first year in Leipzig, and about 25 years before Art of Fugue. All other fugues in permutation style are from still earlier years in Weimar, and that's before 1717. And please correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I see, Bach never more wrote any permuted fugue since 1723 or 4. So why should he do so in his last score? And in a complex multi-theme fugue, how should a permutation matrix work with augmentations, or stratos with inverted themes, or with any other polyphony which goes beyond a fixed metrical pattern? The strict permutation circle is of course contained in Bach's Art of Fugue, namely in 4 canons. Why should Bach in 1748 and later step back to Weimar around 1716? For me, that makes no sense at all. So, the Necrolog and Marburg and Butler and Bach's triple fugue designed together. In summary, they deliver the key for the last fugue and the last group, which concludes the Art of Fugue and which goes together with Bach's late works. Again, if I'm wrong in my musings, if there are any mistakes or grave mistakes, or if they are sources from which I simply do not know anything, then please correct me. I'm curious and I'm absolutely open-minded for all alternative approaches if they are rooted in Bach's handwritings and in the circumstances from a life in 18th century. So far from here. But I do not complain about other people's work only. And here we reach the second part of this video. My own score provides enough reason to complain, so this video again could be very long. But explaining all my changings I made while writing the original script of this episode is probably pretty boring. So I limit myself to 4 exposed contents. Nevertheless, whatever here follows won't touch the overall form of the fugue. As seen, the compromises of foreign alternatives are too big. But tiny things may change the appearance of a fugue as well. Tiny things. The little things make the art of fugue an endless work of progress. In the very first video I told that I have no final solution for Bach's riddle. Too many of these tiny things and uncertainties prevent this. So here's the first of them. Chromatics in the first subpart. If you have accompanied this series, you may remember our talk about the subtle design of Bach's fragment inside the video of the 10 requirements. Our thesis there has been to avoid chromaticism in Stilo Antico. Bar 22 is one example for finding a decision so representative for so many other cases. I make this one a bit more detailed. We are still in the first 30 bars and in our first theme, which is Stilo Antico. Nevertheless, the bass goes in chromatics and generates with the tenor a parallel of diminished fifths here. Is this a mistake? Should I fix this? Well, we'll get rid of both problems by just writing a whole note E in bass. Our prize then is a lack of, well, let's say, kind of harmonical flavor. But perhaps a dotted half E in bass with the following E flat as a quarter could avoid the parallel. However, what then with our Stilo Antico and the chromatic, which doesn't match here in this old style? Should I forego the harmonics in favor of a theoretical directive only? I have no valid answer. As far as I read Bach's score, Bach seemed to have generally opted for tonal aspects rather than the literal adherence to compositional laws. Let's change this half notes to a dotted half note plus a quarter. This keeps the chromatical step intact despite the Stilo Antico. Other people could be more strict than in my handling such things. But if I do so, don't you think that the floating of the music in these false values is disturbed? For me, it's a moment of stumbling into the following D major. So, going back to our two half notes in bass, an alternation of the tenor could be a possibility. See, a little change and the parallels are gone. The floating chromatical character remains intact and the harmonical flavor is, for me, more important than the Stilo Antico here. So, I think that's my definite solution here. Also, definite for the moment. Second one, piano with two hands. The art of fugue may basically be performed on keyboard instrument with two hands. Dentler has another approach, but basically you can play it on piano alone for yourself. I told you that I have nothing to say about the intended instrumental cast, but obviously Bach took care to this detail. Nearly everything can be performed with two-handed piano. Only the mirror fugues make difficulties here. However, sometimes Bach writes keyboard music on the limit on physical execution, not only in the mirror fugue. One example may be the A minor fugue in the first part of well-tempered piano. But these things should remain exceptional. And guess what? This expands the challenge of writing such a quadruple fugue extremely. Here in short, 3 locations with problems. Here, bar 56 presents the last note from first theme in bass. From contrapuntal view, everything is okay. but without compromise you can't play it on piano, strands. Everything would be easier if we write the bass, the upper B flat, but in this case the tenor should probably better come from above, like this one. Could it be that the limitation on 2 hands only gives the tenor here some more elegance? B. Another place here. Already the whole augmentation sub part from bar 80 onwards is on the limit for 2 hands. Bar 80 probably will need a pedal, or you have to shorten the soprano. Bar 89 could eventually need an arpeggio in left hand for all low voices in case of small hands. So the following BRCH part from bar 92 again is tricky for 2-hand piano. A slur in tenor from 95 to 96 make it performable with compromises. However, if we like making friends under pianist folk, we should forego for the wide range here in bar 95. So let us change tenor and bass, and we get a version which is okay from contrapuntal view as well as from aspect of cantability. And last one here, bars 108 and 109 are a little stress test for pianists. Nevertheless, the lines here are perfect, so I wouldn't change here anything from the notes. The last 2 beats from all lower voices in bar 107 fit into the left hand, and first beat from 108, the pedal may help, and from here we are back inside our human anatomy. And the third one, inversions and retrogradal forms. Bar 119 presents the last polyphonic detail. Bach did not use in Art of Fugue so far the retrogradal form, in our case here, of the main theme. We have spoken about the liberty of handling the themes Bach gave us with contrapunctus 4, and in this fugue, in our fugue here, we already made use of this. Inside the retrogradal subpart, this liberty becomes essential. Nevertheless, should we write an E in bar 121? This would be pretty close to a literal retrogradal form of the main theme, but the F sharp as a fourth make in bar 121 more tonal sense. We could diminish the F sharp to an 8th note and transferring via E to the thematical C sharp. In all cases, we are inside the retrograde form of the main theme, referring to the liberties of forming the themes given by Bach in contrapunctus 4. What would you think? In doubt, Bach favored beauty before mathematical correct shapes. So actually I would prefer indeed the 2/8 here. And by the way, if Bach would have stick to mathematical exactness in setting his interval steps on half-tone bass, then the mirror fugues would finally be possible in age of Arnold Schönberg, but not in 18th century. That's only on the sidelines here. The last one, Crossbars. The BRCH theme forces them, but even this unsuspicious first theme of our fugue in old style had driven us in the first 30 bars in Crossbars. This fugue is full of related situations, and finally I'll share a big one with you. In bar 143 we have the courant theme in bass. The main theme follows in 144 in soprano, while in 145 the alto sings BRCH. Of course, the temptation is big writing a stretto of all 4 themes. However, the first old-style theme in tenor slides into a massive crossbar with the alto here. And the tritonus G to C sharp is not really elegant. The C here would be better and avoid the crossbar with following alto. But that moves the same problem to the soprano C sharp in the bar before. And alternatively, presenting this main theme in soprano in A minor, with the C there, we'll get rid of the crossbars, but this lacks in harmonic beauty. So, with regret, I discarded the literal 4 theme stretto here, replaced the first half from Denner's old style theme with the free contrapuntal line. And that's my actual solution here. Okay, enough for now. Tiny things, endless. You will find all other changings I did for your own in next and last upcoming music video, which will present the entire last group in my actual state. Nevertheless, the probability of further versions of tiny things is high. The very last film rehearsal closes then the series with music of the entire last group. For now, all the best, stay healthy, and if you like, until our result and final music video.